Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and others, depending on what you make of that, to another episode of a washed up old military retiree yapping about the glory days and the not so glorious things in between. The sometimes even downright hellscape that is BattleTech. Today, I'm going to talk about something not often spoken of, except as cold hard numbers, statistics in a government report, alongside mass graves and broken cities, and barely mentioned when speaking of any kind of battle planning, except as a PR piece for the more idealistic, to put it lightly, of individuals. They often forgotten and usually gone, especially after tens of thousands of tons of literally walking military ordnance either demolishes your once expensive upper city condo into rubble, or waffle stomps your once cozy mud hut back into terra firma, or maybe end up being jokingly referred to as a squishy or crunchy a second before some mechwarrior decides it's war crime time, and the time is up on your existence, daring to be in the path of such a mighty and heroic pair as a man or woman and their war machine. Yeah, that's right, people. I am talking about the ones whose existence is given little, if any, consideration, on average and in general, when it comes to anything involving big stompy robots fighting. Civilians. The dirty word and best avoided general populace, from which the vast majority of all issues and all solutions tend to spring, where most get their start or never start at all. That being said, let's jump in. Little side note for in this post edit part of me. But the first thing that popped up literally when I looked for civilians in BattleTech as far as image search was quite literally her. So that being said, for my civilians representative backdrop about, on this video of me speaking of civilians, I now choose to use her to represent civilians throughout the rest of the video. You're welcome or cursed. You choose. BattleTech civilians. In the BattleTech universe, civilians are a vital part of the society. Before anything else, let's try to do a short summary of their roles and treatment across different factions as sweetly and short and succinctly as possible, because, well, the average human attention span today is about 8 seconds. So, I apologize, I literally have zero ability to make any summary, period, that would do any justice to such a subject within 8 seconds. Apologies, but that's just not possible. Moving on, let's try to do our version of the short and sweet, shall we? We're gonna start with one of the more notorious of the factions, infamous or famous, depending on who you talk to, who is talking about them, and for who, what, where, when, and why will be applied. The clans. Short and sweet. Civilians in clan society are organized into castes, with each caste having a specific role. The laborer caste, for example, includes miners, farmers, and other workers. While clans are known for their warrior culture, civilians are essential for supporting the clan's military efforts. Civilians are generally treated as second-class citizens with limited rights and opportunities for advancement. Now let's go to the rest of existence, shall we? And into the inner sphere great houses. For civilians in the inner sphere, they are organized into various social classes, with the wealthy and influential holding more power. The Federated Sons, for instance, have a relatively liberal society, with a strong emphasis on individual freedom and merit-based advancement. However, even in the Sons, civilians are subject to the whims of their noble rulers and may face limited opportunities and social mobility. Now to part of the inner sphere, a lot just would want to go away, quite honestly. I mean, you really can never trust Capellans. So, again, short and sweet. For the Capellan Confederation, they have a more collectivist society, with a strong emphasis on community and social welfare. Emphasis being basically, you go to the indoctrination camps, which is basically your home, each and every single possible day. And that is the core of everything, essentially. Civilians are organized into cooperatives. Notice more of that very emphasized language there. Filthy Capellans. And work together to achieve common goals. While the Confederation is a police state, that's putting it so lightly, civilians are generally well treated and have access to education, healthcare, and other social services, depending upon how much of the right think they will have, contain, and act out. Doing anything besides that, you're basically forfeiting your whole existence, and there may or may not be someone coming to coordinate your cooperation very shortly. In the periphery, the place where, well, it's basically what people think of as the Wild West, but isn't really, but kind of is. let's continue moving on. In the periphery, civilians often live in harsher conditions, with limited access to resources and infrastructure. Mercenary units and pirate bands may operate in these regions, preying on civilian populations. Yeah, that's a toss-up if there is a true civilian population in the periphery. Sometimes I just wonder. Moving on, not talking about bands yet. However, some periphery worlds, like the Magistracy of Canopus, when it comes to the Magistracy of Canopus, I literally have another whole video on them almost entirely, and it's based on nothing but hedonistic, depraved degeneracy of every level. Initiate contact with it at your own peril or at your own pleasure. Really, you kind of decide how that goes down. And have developed more stable and democratic societies, mostly thanks to the Magistracy of Canopus. It's so weird how that works. Now let's go down to the general average and just somewhat longer explanation about how the treatment of civilians is as a whole, not necessarily going in depth whatsoever. Again, this is not at all a long lore video. You want more of that? You tell me. So, with the clans being started again. So with the clans, civilians are often forced into clan castes, mentioned above, with limited opportunities for advancement or change. They may be subject to forced labor, conscription, or other forms of exploitation, depending on which clan it is, honestly, and depending on what on earth is going on at the time. Clan Wolverine comes to mind. Now, the inner sphere grade houses. Civilians may face limited social mobility, restricted access to education and resources, and are often subject to the whims of their noble rulers. So basically, this is just to reiterate the point that in the inner sphere, the great houses are basically nobility. Those directly below them might as well just be the merchant class, almost point blank across the board. And below them is everyone that's, generally thought of when you think of civilians in the general sense. But, that changes up depending on where you go, just like the next mention, which is the Capellan Confederation. When it comes to treatment of civilians on the whole in general, reports are mixed. But the report here states civilians are generally well treated, and I'm starting to think that this was just written by the Capellan Confederation's coordinator's own very hand, whoever that might be, the premier, whoever, who cares. And have access to social services, if you are perfectly behaved, you little slave, you. But the Confederation's police state means that dissent or nonconformity can be severely punished. And knowing what I know about the average treatment of civilians, severe punishment goes well and beyond what anyone would consider something to talk about. So let's move on. Now with the periphery. Again, civilians may face harsh conditions, exploitation by mercenaries or bandits, and limited access to resources and infrastructure, unless they build it all themselves. In the periphery, people tend to be much more, I'll put it lightly, self-sufficient and quite questioning of any possible outside forces trying to come around and see what's going on the ground. and more often than not will be sent back on fire or with holes in the ship. It really depends on what they try to do. Now let's do some other mentions, shall we do? Following on with the clan starting off most of this script, we'll go with starting with Ghost Bear Dominion. This clan state, formed after the clan invasion, integrated civilians into their society and established a more democratic system. Civilians have a degree of autonomy and representation in government, but not beyond Ghost Bear HQ proper, so to speak. But they do a lot better than someone like, say, the Capellan Federation. Now for the Federated Sons. The Sons have a relatively liberal society, as mentioned, and they're mostly individual freedom and merit-based. Civilians have more opportunities for social mobility and access to education and resources. The Federated Sons is a mixed bag at the very best of times. It's much like, well, an old nation state that used to exist on Terra many years ago, called the United States of America, essentially. And they did something similar to the Federated Sons, but they had more of a bipolar society on the average. Now, overall, civilians in BattleTech play a role in supporting military and economies of various factions. But their treatment really does range from being a highly praised and respected logistician, or some kind of transport or infrastructure worker that keeps everything going and running, and even sometimes extends into their militaries. There are still civilian contractors, no matter where you go, who will work for the military but don't wear a uniform, although they'll generally be in the same level of danger on average as your military would be, depending on who it is that they decide to pick a fight with. Okay, now let's get into life in BattleTech civilian world, so to speak. With this one, I tried very hard to chop out all of the purely big, giant, stompy robots fighting stuff, and tried to focus on the more low level, as you would surmise, that most civilians would be. Let's continue. In the inner sphere, life expectancy varies greatly, depending on the world's technological level, ranging from 110 to 150 year on Class A worlds, which are the most advanced ones you can find, to 60 to 80 years on lower tech worlds or out in the periphery. Technology is generally more advanced than on 21st century Earth, with self-driving cars, fusion-powered vehicles, and HPG, the Hyperspace Communication Network. Kind of like the extremely advanced version of what used to be called Starlink on Terra back in the day, but much bigger dishes. Government structures vary, as you would assume, with some worlds having feudal systems still, while others are more democratic. Civilians on settled planets with a large population tend to produce their own technology, making imports less common and reducing the need for advanced technology. Now, let's cover the clans. Civilians in the clans are absorbed into the caste system, as is mentioned, with roles assigned on capabilities and merit for the most part. Laborers, technicians, scientists, and merchants are common occupations. In the clans, it is greatly and highly motivationally, I would say, addressed to your general civilian that you should try to do your damnedest and best in whichever caste and position you're given. Movement between castes is rare, but possible, with progress based on, again, individual merit for the most part. Depending on clan politics, some clans are better with this than others. The clans are generally egalitarian at the lowest level of society, with a focus on merit-based advancement, again, with the merit. Civilians on conquered planets are sorted into labor, technical, scientific, and merchant castes, with those who refuse to comply labeled as bandits and, well, outcasts. Now, let's get into our commonalities, I would say, that are seemingly shared across every faction, the inner sphere, periphery, the outer reaches, and everywhere in between. Let's get into that one. The commonalities are such. Civilians in both the inner sphere live, and in the clans, live in a world with advanced technology, but with varying degrees of access and development. Social structures and governance vary greatly, with feudal systems, democracies, and meritocracies present. Individual merit and capabilities play a significant role in determining one's place in society, heavily dependent on where, and the key differences are as such. The inner sphere has a more diverse range of technological levels, with some worlds being more primitive than others. Clans, on the other hand, have a more uniform technological level as a whole. The clans have a strict caste system with limited social mobility, whereas the inner sphere has more fluid social structures, again, heavily dependent upon where. The clans are known for their warrior culture and merit-based advancement, whereas the inner sphere is more varied, so that's fairly simply put, although it, again, depends. Keep in mind that these summaries are all based upon trying to provide the shortest, sweetest, and most succinct summary of civilian life made writ within MechWarrior BattleTech. So now let's get into something that may be close to your average civilian's experience in the middle of, well, the namesake, BattleTech. I want for you, for a moment, to imagine yourself. You and maybe your family, or just your dog, or your cat, depending on what choices you've made most early in life. Who am I to judge? And you live in your abode. Could be mud hut or a nice little log cabin out on the periphery somewhere on some estranged planet. Or maybe you live in a big mega city with an expensive apartment and all the trappings and pleasures of such a lifestyle. It's just you and yourself. And then suddenly, boom. Your entire world shakes. You hear something big and heavy incoming from the sky. You rush to your window, now cracked, maybe shattered, to see giant, round dropships coming down into your neighborhood. The flag seen on the side is nothing you recognize. Now you hear sirens as the warning is being issued to evacuate or to try and shelter in place. And as the enemy is dropping right next to your building, your whole world explodes. You don't remember when you got flung to the back of your living space. You don't remember what you were doing 5 minutes ago. But all you know now is everything is fuzzy. There's a loud ringing sound. And you feel the earth shake. You slowly come back and realize that half of the building you live in is gone. You're in a bit of a rubble heap in the back. And you hear heavy, heavy movement right outside your building. You hear weapons fire, the sounds of screaming and shouting, and the heavy, heavy march right past the opening of what once was where you used to live. And the heavy, ground-shaking steps going past your sight of battle mechs. And as everything slowly fades to black, the last sight you have is a giant metal face staring right at you. And the sound of charging weapons. there you have it, folks. So, this was simply to give as short and sweet as can be managed about, well, the civilians that make up the other 99% of existence inside BattleTech. Thank you all very much for joining me. If you enjoy this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're feeling so generous, please consider clicking the join button. If it's there, that is. I don't know. Sometimes the overlords of my terminal take things away from me simply because I exist. So, if that's not a thing, then thanks anyway. That being said, again, thank you for your time. And I will see all of you in the next one. I am Badger 7 Actual. Thank you all for your time. And I hope that you enjoyed this merry mess of mine. And if you would like more of this kind of content, then please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And please ensure you check out our other videos. And if you wish to see something else, or you have a personal request, then please consider joining the Discord or letting me know in the comment section down below. Thank you all once again. And until next time, this is Badger 7 Actual, out.